The Mind Dependence of Objects by Errol E. Harris. At the end of his review of Nature, Mind, and Modern Science, Professor Blanchard complains that the proof that the qualities of physical things are relative to mind, the relation between consciousness and earlier phases in mental evolution, the relation between mind as a system already complete and mind as the enterprise of achieving that system, are left in too deep a twilight. As these matters are fundamental to the kind of theory of knowledge that I favor, they should not be left in deeper twilight than is unavoidable, and I shall do my best to shed a little more light on them. It can hardly be much, however, because the subject requires far more research that I have yet been able to undertake, but it may be possible, at least, to clarify some points and guard against possible misunderstandings. Section 1. First, let us examine the contention that the qualities of physical things are relative to mind. I have not myself made this assertion in so many words, but Professor Blanchard thinks I am committed to it, and should do more to defend it. Obviously, the first step must be to remove its ambiguities. The qualities of physical objects is a phrase which has at least two distinguishable references. 1. It may be used to refer to those qualities which we directly perceive in physical things, colors, sounds, scents, and the like, which have been called secondary qualities, and which Locke and others have declared to be mind-dependent. 2. It may refer to the properties of physical things, possibly never directly perceived at all, which determine their nature and their behavior. I hesitate to call these primary qualities because the primary qualities of which Locke and other philosophers speak are qualities which we perceive. As Berkeley pointed out, they are really properties of certain of the secondary qualities, whereas many of the properties of physical things, to which I refer here, may not be at all perceptible as such. They include such properties as radiation of energy, electrical charge, chemical affinity, and so forth. It will readily be seen that the line to be drawn between such properties and what have been called primary qualities will be uncertain. Radiation, electrical charge, chemical affinity, and the like are closely related to spatiotemporal characters, and primary qualities are either themselves spatiotemporal, shape, size, position, movement, or closely dependent on space and time, number, solidity, impenetrability. These primaries are themselves dependent upon the physical properties of things, e.g., the shape of a crystal upon its chemical and physical properties, as also its solidity. Yet, primary qualities and physical properties are by no means the same. Qualities, taken in the first sense, are immediate objects of sense. This, I think, is admitted on all hands. I am myself unable to distinguish in my own experience of sensation between anything describable as an act of consciousness and the immediate object of consciousness. Moore, like Brentano and Meinong, claims that he can, but Russell asserts that the act and the object of sensation are indistinguishable, and Bosanquet also holds this view, which, I suppose, would have been held by Locke as well, and undoubtedly by Berkeley. I have argued that Moore fails to make the distinction significant because he alleges that the object is the same in, as it is, out of, relation to consciousness. We seemed forced, therefore, to the conclusion that every immediate object of consciousness is, so to speak, itself the stuff of consciousness, and none can exist unperceived. Their esse is percipi, and Berkeley cannot be gainsaid. Unsensed sensa is a contradiction in terms, and the term sense data is legitimate, if at all, not as meaning given for sensing, but as meaning sense-given data for inference or some further process of thinking. If esse is percipi, is intended, as Berkeley intended it, to apply to all physical existence, it is not a tautology, and Berkeley certainly did not so regard it. But if its application is restricted to sensa, it is a tautology, for what we mean by the phrase immediate object of sense, as above explained, is that which constitutes and is constituted as consciousness, and cannot therefore be anything unsensed. The decision that the qualities of physical things are relative to mind, in this sense of quality, is thus a purely linguistic decision, and may be thought by some to be trivial. Before we can decide whether or not the qualities of physical things in the second sense, physical properties, are relative to mind, we must clear away further ambiguities. Whatever my mind may be, it is obvious that when I am aware of an object, that object bears some relation to my mind, and so is relative to it. But this is not what Professor Blanchard means when he asks for better arguments for the relativity to mind of physical qualities. If, however, relative to means dependent for existence upon, then I do not wish to argue at all that the physical properties of things are relative to my mind, or any other particular personal mind. It may be doubted even if Berkeley wished to maintain that they were, for he admits the persistence and existence of qualities when they are not perceived by human spirits, so long as they are perceived by God, and he postulates a settled order of nature dependent upon God's will, by reference to which veridical perceptions can be distinguished from illusions. But, whatever may be the case with Berkeley, the so-called objective idealists are all careful to distinguish between finite minds and mind absolute or universal, and they none of them argue for the dependence of the existence of the physical properties of things upon finite minds. I should myself be willing to confine the term mind to the finite consciousness, if I were convinced that the most significant characteristics of human mentality could not be discerned, admittedly in forms of varying adequacy and completeness, throughout nature, and if I were not consequently led to conclude that they form part of a reality more ultimate and complete in just these characteristics. We might still be inclined to withhold the name mind from the less adequate forms, but from the complete form we hardly can. Whether we restrict or extend the use of the word depends on whether we think it more important to emphasize differences or draw attention to identities. But if we restrict it, it is not true that the qualities of physical things are relative to mind in any way which would make their existence wholly dependent upon finite consciousness. If we extend it, there is much more to be said. Section 2. Before developing this side of the matter, however, I wish to clarify my own position with regard to Russell, Moore, and Price, to name no others holding similar views. In criticizing them, I was not attempting to establish my own positive doctrine. My intention was only to show that the metaphysical doctrine, tacitly or openly presupposed by their arguments, commits them to a position from which Berkeley is unassailable. As I have tried to make clear, I myself reject Berkeley's view, not simply because it is repugnant to common sense, but because I find it internally incoherent, and because I think it can be shown to be false in relation to a more comprehensive, more coherent, and more intelligible theory, which is, therefore, more credible. But the writers I have attacked are not in a position to reject Berkeley's idealism, without involving themselves in contradiction. My argument against Moore is, admittedly, in part an argumentum ad hominem, and it is this part to which Professor Blanchard objects. But I do not think, as he does, that it is fallacious for that reason. More, in his own analysis of sensation into object and consciousness, is attempting to isolate a something not cognized to which consciousness is added. That this is so borne out by his earlier analysis of esse, in esse is percipi, into two constituents, percipi plus x. My parody of his argument was designed to reveal that this something equals x is 1. The same sort of fiction as Locke's idea of substance in general, or else 2. A surreptitious reintroduction of that quality which is, by definition, an immediate object of sense, what Moore himself previously identified as that part of esse which is percipi, and not x, or else 3. A confusion of both of these. I have no doubt that in Moore's thinking, it is the third. The answer to Professor Blanchard's question, is the confusion that was committed in the first case also committed in the second, is therefore that the confusion alleged in the first case is not committed there, but is committed in the second. The error supposed to be involved in talking about the sensation of blue, that of not distinguishing two elements in the meaning of sensation, assumes that there are two such elements. But here I join company with Russell and Bosanquet, and deny that the sensed can be distinguished from the sensing any more than the existent can be distinguished from the existing. Moore, however, first invents a non-existent element, which he then distinguishes from the sensation, and, having done so, proceeds to confuse the two by surreptitiously and indiscriminately substituting one for the other. It is a confusion between an element of consciousness and something that is no element of consciousness, and for the existence of which we have no evidence. Something, we know not what. This, like Kant's Ding und sich, is the ghost of Locke's substance, and that again is the lingering shadow of the external physical entity which is supposed to be the original source of the simple ideas of sense, the immediate objects of our consciousness. A similar confusion is committed in the doctrine of unsensed sensibilia. My denial of them Professor Blanchard calls a short way with dissenters, and professes lack of confidence in it as an argument. But I am far from imagining that it establishes anything more than the existence of a confusion like the above in the minds of those who advocate the doctrine. They confuse two senses of the word object, one in which it means what is immediately sensed, the sensum, and one in which it means the physical thing and its properties, usually assumed to be the original cause of the sensum. Again, my argument is designed to do no more than demonstrate that where the assumption is made of a causal relation between physical things and the mind, and the end effect of the causal chain between them is assumed to be the sensum, one is committed to a theory of knowledge which must confine consciousness to sensa and their derivatives, and which can provide no basis for any belief in unsensed sensibilia. Those who contend for unsensed sensibilia are trying to have it both ways, and they appear to succeed only so far as they confuse, and cause the unwary likewise to confuse, in the word object, the sensum with the physical thing alleged to cause it. This confusion is easy to make because sensa are abstractions made for the purpose of theoretical analysis and are unknown to common sense. So that, in ordinary parlance, the word object refers only to the physical thing, or something standing to our knowledge in analogous relations. Thus, we speak of chairs and tables as objects, but not normally of color patches and noises. Causal and representative theories of perception, however, construct these familiar objects out of sensa, of which the real things are supposed to be the original causes. The real things are thus removed beyond the reach of consciousness, and cease to be objects at all. Yet the confusion between the real thing and the phenomenal object lingers, and philosophers who espouse such theories are in consequence very prone to confuse the sensa with the external causes, so that they are led into a belief in unsensed sensibilia, which their own presuppositions will not sustain. For those who are still determined to adhere in some manner to a Lockean type of realism, this belief, rooted in this confusion, seems to offer a refuge from the unpalatable consequences of Berkeley's logic and its inexorable outcome in Hume's skepticism. But the escape is merely apparent, and the doctrine rests upon an equivocation which renders it fallacious. My contention has been that the views of Russell, Broad, Moore, and Price are all infected with this error, and their successors, Wittgenstein, Carnap, Ayer, and finally the linguistic analysts, have tried to correct it by various philosophical catharses, resulting in a new, though disguised, form of skeptical nihilism. This course of thought seems to me to offer no satisfactory way out of the labyrinth into which Locke led us. It provides, at most, a technique which appears to dispose of problems only by evading them. The one sound remedy is to renounce altogether the metaphysical presupposition of a world of physical objects in external relation, some of which, to use Samuel Alexander's phrase, being more gifted than others, receive ideas or sensa as the end products of chains of causation, and so become conscious.